Have you ever wondered what the sound of consequence truly is? I have. For me, it was the sound of my own daughter's scream echoing through the vast empty halls of a house she was convinced she owned. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered horror, a sound that marked the end of a long and painful story of betrayal. Before I tell you what caused that scream and how her 78-year-old father orchestrated it all from a quiet apartment across town, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And please hit that like button and subscribe if you believe a person's dignity is worth more than any amount of money. The symphony of their downfall began with a triumphant arrival. My daughter Simone and her husband Darnell returned from a celebratory trip to Dubai looking like they owned the world. They stepped out of a black car service, the air around them thick with the scent of expensive perfume and smug satisfaction. Their designer luggage was handled by the driver, but they carried their self-importance themselves. I can picture them so clearly. Simone in a silk pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car, and Darnell with a $3,000 watch on his wrist, already talking about the next big purchase. As the car pulled away, they stood for a moment at the bottom of the driveway, gazing up at the house on the hill. My house. The house I built with my own two hands for my beloved wife Eleanor. To them, it was not a home filled with a lifetime of memories. It was simply a $3 million asset they had successfully liquidated. I imagined Darnell draping his arm around Simone's shoulders, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Look at it, baby," he'd say. "The last time we'll ever see it. The end of an era and the beginning of ours." Their steps on the stone pathway were not the steps of people returning home. They were the steps of conquerors leaving a captured territory, confident that the spoils of war were waiting for them in their bank account. Every detail was a testament to their victory. The perfectly manicured lawn they never tended, to the sturdy oak door they never appreciated, the brass handle that my Eleanor polished every Saturday for 40 years. They saw none of the love, only the price tag. Darnell reached into his pocket and pulled out the key. He held it up, letting it glint in the late afternoon sun, a small trophy symbolizing his cleverness. He probably gave Simone a wink before sliding it into the lock. The click of the tumblers was a familiar solid sound, the sound of everything being exactly as it should be. The key turned smoothly, just as it always had. There was no resistance, no hint of the earth-shattering surprise that lay just beyond the threshold. With a final confident push, Darnell swung the door open, a broad smile spreading across his face as he prepared to step into the life he had stolen. But the smile never reached its peak. It froze, then melted away into a mask of stunned confusion. Simone, who was right behind him, bumped into his suddenly rigid back. She peered around him, her own expression of glee instantly evaporating. Inside there was nothing. Not a single piece of furniture, no grand foyer table to greet them, no plush rugs on the gleaming hardwood floors. The living room to their left was a hollow, empty space. The dining room to their right was a cavern of silence. Sunlight streamed through the bare windows, illuminating nothing but dust motes dancing in the air and faint ghostly outlines on the walls where our family portraits had hung for decades. It was an emptiness so absolute, so profound, that it seemed to suck the very air from their lungs. I imagined Darnell blinking, shaking his head slightly as if to clear a strange mirage. He took a hesitant step inside his expensive leather shoes, making a sharp, lonely click on the bare floor. The sound echoed unnaturally in the cavernous silence. He turned, looking at Simone with wide, questioning eyes. But Simone was not looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the void, her mind struggling to process the impossible reality before her. The betrayal she had so carefully planned had somehow been turned back on her. And that is when she opened her mouth and screamed. That scream was born from a seed planted 2 years earlier in the suffocating silence that followed my Eleanor's passing. After 50 years of marriage, her absence was more than just an emptiness. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket of quiet that smothered every room of our home. The house, once a vibrant vessel of our shared life, became a cavernous museum of memories. The grandfather clock in the hallway, which we had bought on our first anniversary, no longer chimed with cheerful promise. Its ticks and tocks sounded like a slow, mournful countdown in the stillness. I would walk from room to room, touching the back of her favorite armchair, running my fingers along the spines of the books she loved, half expecting to hear her call my name from the kitchen. But the only reply was the deafening echo of my own loneliness. The silence was the worst part. We had filled this house with so much life, so much noise. Laughter during family dinners, the gentle hum of her sewing machine in the evenings, the sound of jazz music drifting from the radio while we cooked together on Sunday mornings. Without her, the silence was an intruder, a constant reminder of what I had lost. My world had shrunk to the four walls of this house, and inside those walls I was utterly and completely alone. I was a ghost haunting the beautiful life we had built. It was into this desolate quiet that Simone and Darnell arrived, bearing what seemed like a lifeline. They came over for dinner one evening about 6 months after the funeral. Simone brought my favorite dish, and Darnell spoke with a gentle, practiced concern that I hadn't heard from him in years. They watched me move around my own kitchen a little slower, a little more uncertain than I used to be. They saw the uneaten food in the refrigerator and the slight tremor in my hands as I poured the iced tea. After dinner, as we sat in the living room that felt far too large for just the three of us, Simone reached out and took my hand. Her touch was soft, her expression a perfect portrait of daughterly love. "Dad," she began, her voice gentle, "we've been worried about you. You're all alone in this huge house. It's too much for one person to handle." Darnell nodded in solemn agreement, placing a hand on my shoulder. "She's right, Elijah. We hate the thought of you being here by yourself. What if something happened? What if you fell?" He let the unspoken fears hang in the air, preying on the vulnerability that grief had carved into my heart. And then came the proposal, delivered as if it were the most natural, selfless idea in the world. "We want to move in," Dad, Simone said, her eyes shining with what I mistook for sincerity. "We can help you with the house, the cooking, the errands. We can be a family again, all under one roof. You wouldn't have to be lonely anymore. We'll take care of you." To a man drowning in solitude, their words were not just a life raft. They were the promise of a sunlit shore. I hesitated for a moment, a flicker of my old independence wanting to resist. This house was mine and Eleanor's. But the thought of hearing laughter in these halls again, of smelling coffee brewing in the morning for more than just myself, was an irresistible temptation. The loneliness was a physical ache, and they were offering the only medicine I craved: companionship. My need for family, for the simple comfort of having my daughter near, blinded me to the subtle glint of calculation in their eyes. In my profound emptiness, I saw their offer not as an intrusion, but as a blessing, a true gift from God. So I agreed. What they failed to understand, what they could never comprehend, was the true value of what they were plotting to steal. This house was not a structure of wood and stone and glass. It was a sanctuary built on a foundation of love and promises. I laid the first brick myself on the day Eleanor told me we were going to have a child. I hammered every nail, picturing our future family filling these rooms. It was my promise to her, a physical manifestation of my vow to give her a life of safety and happiness. Every corner held a story, a piece of our shared soul. The large bay window in the living room was where Eleanor would sit for hours with a book, the sunlight making a halo of her beautiful silver hair. The worn spot on the kitchen floor by the sink was where we danced cheek to old songs on the radio while the dishes soaked. The mighty oak tree in the backyard grew from a tiny sapling we planted on Simone's first birthday. I built a tire swing on its thickest branch, and the sound of my daughter's laughter as I pushed her higher and higher was woven into its very leaves. The garden was Eleanor's pride and joy. We spent countless weekends together, our hands deep in the rich soil, planting the roses that still bloomed with a fiery passion every summer. This house was not an asset to be valued in dollars. It was a living, breathing diary of our 50 years together. It was the last, most tangible piece of Eleanor that I had left. And I, in my grief and my desperate need, had just invited the wrecking crew right through the front door. For the first few months after they moved in, the house felt alive again. The crushing silence was replaced by the low hum of a television, the sound of footsteps on the stairs, and the scent of Simone cooking in the kitchen. It was a convincing imitation of a happy family, and I soaked it in like a man dying of thirst. I was so grateful for the company, so relieved to have the weight of my loneliness lifted, that I failed to notice the subtle shift in the foundation beneath my feet. The blessing was beginning to show its true colors, not with a sudden storm, but with a slow, creeping erosion that began to wash away the memory of my Eleanor piece by painful piece. The first casualty was the curtains in the living room. They weren't just curtains to me. Eleanor had picked them out herself 20 years ago. They were a soft floral pattern in pale yellows and greens, and they had a way of catching the morning sun that made the whole room feel like it was smiling. She used to say they filtered the light into pure happiness. They held the faint, sweet scent of our life together, a mix of her perfume and the countless holidays we'd celebrated in that room. They were a part of the home's soul. One Saturday morning, Simone came in with a cup of coffee for me, her smile bright and practiced. "Dad," she said, gesturing towards the window. I was thinking, these curtains are so dated. They make the room feel old. What if we got something a little more modern, something sleek and elegant to really brighten the place up? Her voice was full of cheerful suggestion, as if she were offering me the greatest gift in the world. I looked at the curtains, at the way the light was pouring through them, and a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I didn't want new curtains. I wanted the ones my Eleanor had chosen. But how could I say that without sounding like a stubborn old man ungrateful for his daughter's care? I didn't want to cause friction. I wanted the peace I had so desperately missed, so I forced a weak smile and nodded. "Whatever you think is best, dear." It was a mistake. 2 days later, a package arrived. The old curtains came down, and with them a piece of the room's warmth and light. They were replaced with heavy, dark gray panels of fabric. They were modern, yes. They were also lifeless. They blocked the morning sun, casting the room in a perpetual gloomy twilight. The room no longer felt like it was smiling. It felt like it was in mourning. Simone, however, was thrilled. "See," she said, standing back with her hands on her hips. "So much more sophisticated." I just nodded, the knot in my stomach now a cold, heavy stone. I had given them an inch, and they were already preparing to take a mile. The next front in their quiet war was Eleanor's library. It was her favorite room in the house, her personal sanctuary. It was a small room, but it was lined wall to wall with books she had collected over a lifetime. They were not arranged for decoration. They were arranged with love. There was a section for her favorite poets, another for classic novels, a shelf for her gardening books, and one for the mystery paperbacks she devoured. I knew the system by heart. I knew exactly where to find the volume of Mary Oliver's poems she read to me on our last anniversary. The order of those books was a map of my wife's mind and heart. One afternoon, I came in to find Darnell in the middle of the library, surrounded by towering stacks of books pulled from the shelves. He had a scanner and a laptop and a look of immense self-satisfaction on his face. "Elijah," he boomed, as if I had caught him performing a grand act of charity. "I'm doing you a huge favor. I'm digitizing Eleanor's collection, and then I'm going to reorganize these shelves to look more aesthetic. It's going to be so much cleaner and more professional." My own heart went cold. "Darnell, please don't. There's a system." He waved a dismissive hand. "Don't you worry about a thing. You can trust me." I didn't trust him. I went for a long walk, and when I returned, the deed was done. The books were back on the shelves, but the soul of the room was gone. They were now arranged by the color of their spines, a meaningless rainbow of leather and paper. It looked like a display in a soulless furniture store. Her cherished poetry was mixed in with old travel guides. Her classic novels were wedged between cookbooks. The map of her heart had been erased. Later that night, I went in desperate to find that Mary Oliver book. I searched for an hour, my frustration mounting with every misplaced volume. It was gone, lost in the chaos. When I mentioned it to Darnell, he just shrugged. "Come on, Elijah, it's just books. It looks much better now, doesn't it? More organized." His words were a quiet, brutal insult. He hadn't just moved books, he had vandalized my memories. The erosion became an avalanche the day they took the armchair. It wasn't just a chair. It was our chair. A large, overstuffed leather armchair that had been the centerpiece of our living room for 30 years. The leather was worn smooth and cracked in places. There was a permanent, comfortable dip on the left side where Eleanor always sat, curled up with her legs tucked under her. It was where we read the Sunday paper, where we watched old movies, where she held Simone on her lap as a child. The chair was the keeper of our shared history. One afternoon, they encouraged me to go visit an old friend. When I came back, it was gone. In its place stood a sleek black leather sofa. It was beautiful, I suppose, in a cold, sterile way. It was also as hard as a rock and utterly devoid of comfort or warmth. My voice trembled when I asked, "Where's the chair?" Darnell was beaming, proud of his surprise. "Oh, that old thing," he said with a laugh. "It was falling apart, Elijah. An eyesore. I had it taken to the dump this morning. This new sofa is a huge upgrade, don't you think? Real Italian leather." He didn't ask. He informed me. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. He had thrown away a piece of my life, a piece of my wife, and replaced it with a monument to his own shallow taste. I sat on the new sofa, and it felt like sitting on a block of ice. I was a stranger in my own living room. The final act of my imprisonment was the quietest and the most devastating. Up until then, as much as my home had been invaded, I still had my freedom. I had my car, I could escape, I could drive to the park, visit the cemetery, or just sit by the lake and think. My old pickup truck was my last connection to my independence. They took that too. Darnell started making little comments. "You took that corner a little fast, Elijah. Did you see that stop sign?" Then one day, Simone sat me down at the kitchen table, her face a mask of solemn concern. "Dad," she said, her voice soft and full of pity. "Darnell and I are worried about your driving. Your reaction times just aren't what they used to be. Yesterday, you almost hit Mrs. Henderson's cat. For your own safety and for everyone else's, we think it's best if we hold on to your keys for a while." "I had no memory of any cat. I'm a perfectly safe driver, Simone," I protested, my voice rising. "We know you are, Dad. We know," she said, patting my hand as if I were a confused child. "This is just a precaution. It's for the best. Don't worry. We will drive you anywhere you need to go. Anytime." And just like that, the walls of my prison closed in. My world, which had already shrunk to the confines of my home, now shrunk even further. I was completely dependent on them. My schedule was their schedule. My freedom was subject to their approval. They had not just taken my keys, they had taken my last shred of autonomy. I was a guest in a house that was no longer mine, a prisoner of the very people who were supposed to be my caregivers, living in a museum of a life that was being systematically dismantled around me. The blessing had revealed itself to be a meticulously planned siege, and I was utterly and completely surrounded. With my physical world now confined to the walls of the house and the boundaries of the yard, the next phase of their siege began. It was no longer about changing my environment, but about changing me, or rather changing my perception of myself. Having taken my keys, they now set out to take my mind. It was a campaign waged not with loud arguments, but with quiet, poisonous whispers of doubt, a relentless psychological erosion designed to convince me that I was no longer the man I once was. They needed to break my spirit to make me believe I was incompetent, because a man who questions his own sanity is a man who cannot fight back. It started with small, almost unnoticeable jabs at my memory. We'd be sitting at the dinner table, and I'd share a story from my past, perhaps about my time in the service or how I started my construction business. When I finished, Simone would smile, a gentle, pitying smile. "Oh, Dad, that's such a wonderful story," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. "But you told us that exact same story yesterday morning at breakfast. Don't you remember?" I would search my mind, a cold knot of uncertainty tightening in my gut. I had no recollection of telling it. Was I really becoming that repetitive, that forgetful? The seed of doubt was planted. Then came the misplaced objects. I was a man of routine and order. My reading glasses always went on the nightstand. My wallet always went on the dresser. My favorite pen always sat next to the crossword puzzle. But suddenly things started to disappear. I'd spent 20 frantic minutes searching for my glasses, only for Darnell to find them sitting in the back of the refrigerator nestled next to the milk. "Having a senior moment, Elijah," he'd say with a hearty false chuckle. "Looks like we've got to keep a closer eye on you." He made it sound like a joke, but the message was clear. You are losing control. You are not to be trusted. They manufactured forgotten appointments, creating a false history that I couldn't dispute. "Dad, you missed your dental cleaning this morning," Simone would say, her face a mask of disappointment. "I reminded you about it twice last night." I had no memory of the appointment, no memory of her reminders. The confusion was dizzying. I began to doubt every thought, every memory. I bought a small notepad and started writing everything down, a desperate attempt to anchor myself to reality. But even the notepad became a weapon they used against me. "You wrote here that you wanted fish for dinner," Darnell would say, "but 5 minutes ago you insisted you wanted chicken. Your mind is playing tricks on you, old man." It was a constant, merciless drip of psychological torture, and my confidence was eroding with every drop. The turning point. The incident that finally shattered my defenses and made me truly believe their narrative was a matter of life and death. It was about my heart medication. I have a condition that requires me to take a specific pill every night. Without it, the rhythm of my heart can become dangerously erratic. My prescription was running low, and I knew I only had 2 pills left. The next morning, I carefully wrote down all the necessary information for Darnell on a fresh page in my notepad. I wrote the name of the medication, the precise dosage, the pharmacy's name and phone number, and the prescription number. My handwriting was clear and steady. I tore the page out and handed it to him. "Darnell, this is very important," I said. "I need this before tonight." He took the note with a casual wave. "Don't you worry, Elijah. I'm heading out this afternoon. I'll pick it up for you. Consider it done." The day wore on. I tried to read, but my anxiety grew with each passing hour. I watched the clock, listening for the sound of Darnell's car in the driveway. By 5 o'clock, there was still no sign of him. By 7, as I was preparing to take my second-to-last pill, a genuine fear began to creep in. He came home just after 9, long after the pharmacy had closed, carrying bags of takeout food and smelling of beer. He was laughing about something he'd seen on TV. My voice was tight with anxiety when I asked Darnell, "Where is my medicine?" He stopped laughing and his face clouded over with performative frustration. He slapped his forehead. "Oh man. Elijah, I'm so sorry. I went to the pharmacy, I really did. But the note you gave me was a total mess. The pharmacist couldn't read it. You wrote down the wrong dosage number and the prescription number was jumbled. I spent almost an hour there trying to sort it out with them, but they couldn't find you in the system with the information you gave me." "That's impossible," I said, my heart starting to pound. "I wrote it perfectly clearly." "Well, see for yourself," he said, pulling the crumpled note from his pocket and tossing it on the table. I picked it up with a trembling hand. I stared at it in horror. It was my note on the paper from my pad, but the writing was a chaotic scrawl. The letters were shaky, the numbers were transposed just as he said. It looked like the handwriting of a man who had lost control of his own faculties. I didn't understand how it was possible. In that moment, the world tilted on its axis. The evidence was right there in my hands. Maybe I was truly losing my mind. That night, I took my very last pill. I lay awake for hours, my hand on my chest, feeling every flutter and skip of my own terrified heart. The fear was twofold. There was the immediate physical fear of a medical emergency, but there was a deeper, colder terror that settled into my bones. It was the fear that I had become exactly what they said I was: a confused, incompetent old man who was a danger to himself. For the first time, I believed them. The foundation of my own identity cracked, and I felt myself falling into an abyss of self-doubt. With my spirit broken, they moved in for the final step: total isolation. My old army buddy George was my last remaining lifeline. He was the only one who I still spoke to regularly. One Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. Simone picked it up in the kitchen. I heard her say, "Oh, hi, George." I started to get up from my chair, a small spark of hope igniting in my chest. But then I heard her say, in a voice filled with syrupy concern, "You know, he's actually resting right now. His memory has been a little shaky lately, and the doctor says he really needs his quiet time to avoid getting confused. It's been a difficult few weeks." "Yes, I'll be sure to tell him you called." "Okay, you too. Bye-bye." She hung up the phone. I stood there frozen. "Why did you do that, Simone?" "I'm right here. I can talk to George." She came over and wrapped her arm around my shoulders, her touch feeling less like a comfort and more like a restraint. "Oh, Dad," she sighed. "We're just trying to protect you. Long conversations get you agitated and anxious. The doctor was very clear about that." "What doctor?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The new specialist we talked about, remember? Don't worry your head about it. We're handling everything." There was no new specialist. But in my current state, adrift in a fog of fear and confusion, I couldn't be sure of anything anymore. After that day, the phone stopped ringing. My last bridge to the outside world, to the man I used to be, had been burned. I was now completely and utterly alone, an island of one in a house full of enemies with only my 2 loving caregivers to watch over me. The siege was complete. I was their prisoner. I had reached the absolute lowest point of my life. The man I once was, the proud builder and devoted husband, had been systematically dismantled and replaced with a fragile, forgetful caricature. My days had settled into a monotonous gray rhythm. I would wake up, eat the breakfast that was prepared for me, and then sit in the cold, unfamiliar living room staring out the window at a world I could no longer access. I was a prisoner in my own home, but the more terrifying prison was the one they had built inside my mind. I had started to believe their narrative. I truly felt that I was a burden, a fading mind in a failing body, and that my loving daughter and her husband were my saviors, patiently managing my decline. The shame of my own perceived incompetence was a constant heavy weight on my soul. Hope was a foreign country I never expected to visit again. It was on a bleak Thursday afternoon that my world was set on fire. The spark was something mundane, something that happens 1,000 times a day in any home, a phone call. Simone was in the kitchen, her voice sharp and businesslike as she paced back and forth. I was in the living room in my usual spot on the stiff leather sofa, half listening, half lost in a fog of apathy. From the snippets I could hear she was talking to a real estate agent. She used words like escrow closing date and appraisal value. I felt a distant pang of sadness, assuming they were perhaps refinancing the house to better manage the costs of my care. It seemed logical. It fit the story they had so carefully crafted. "Yes, the inspection went through without a hitch," she said into her phone. "The offer is solid. We want to close by the end of the month if possible, the sooner the better." She paused, listening. "No, there won't be any complications with the occupant. That is being handled. The occupant. That's what I was, not a father, not the owner, but an occupant. A piece of furniture to be moved or discarded as needed." A moment later she ended the call, or so I thought. She placed her sleek smartphone on the granite countertop, but in her haste, she must have only silenced the screen without actually ending the connection. She then called out, "Honey, I'm just running upstairs to grab the preliminary title report for the lawyer." Her footsteps receded up the main staircase, leaving me alone in the quiet downstairs. The house was silent for a moment. Then a voice crackled to life from the phone on the counter. It was Darnell's voice, tinny and distant through the small speaker. "So is everything set with the agent?" he asked. From upstairs, Simone's voice called down her words, echoing slightly in the large house. "Yes, everything is perfect, honey. The offer was even higher than we expected. $3.2 million. Can you believe it?" Darnell let out a low whistle from the phone. "Incredible. And you're sure the closing can happen that fast?" "What about the old man? We need to have him moved before the final walkthrough." My blood ran cold. Moved. I sat up straighter, the fog in my mind beginning to thin. What were they talking about? Simone's voice came from the top of the stairs, now closer and clearer. "That's what I was just talking to the agent about. We'll need a week, maybe 10 days. I feel a little bit guilty, Darnell. He seems so lost these days." For a fleeting, foolish second, I thought I heard a flicker of genuine remorse, a spark of the daughter I once knew. Darnell's reply snuffed it out instantly. His voice from the phone was devoid of any warmth, sharp and cold as a shard of glass. He scoffed a sound of pure, undisguised contempt. "Guilty, Simone, don't go soft on me now. This is a business transaction. We are unlocking the value of an asset. That's all this is. His being lost is what's making this whole thing possible. The old man won't even know what's happening. It's the perfect plan." I stopped breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful thud. The conversation continued, a brutal dissection of my future spoken between the phone on the counter and the voice from upstairs. "We'll tell him we found a wonderful new resort for him to stay at for a while." Darnell continued, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "A little vacation to help him rest and recover his strength. He'll believe anything we say at this point. By the time he figures out it's not a resort, the sale will be complete, the money will be in our account, and we'll be on a flight to Dubai. Golden Years Assisted Living will handle the rest. They specialize in cases like his. It's the only logical solution, baby. It's for the best." Every word was a nail being hammered into my coffin. The stolen keys, the replaced furniture, the gaslighting, the missed medication, the isolation. It was all a lie, a calculated, cruel, and monstrous lie. It was not about my care. It was not about my safety. It was a cold-blooded strategy to break me down, declare me incompetent, and steal my home, my legacy, everything my wife and I had ever worked for. The man I thought was my son-in-law, the woman I knew was my daughter, were nothing but thieves cloaked in the disguise of love and concern. The floor seemed to fall away beneath me, and I was plunged into a chasm of betrayal so deep and dark I thought it would consume me. But in that darkness, a light appeared. A memory. As their voices finally faded and the call ended, another voice rose in my mind, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. It was Eleanor's voice. The scene came back to me with a clarity that cut through all the doubt and confusion they had manufactured. The sterile white hospital room, the relentless rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the scent of antiseptic. the weak but impossibly warm grip of my wife's hand in mine. Simone was on the other side of the bed, her face buried in the sheets, sobbing. Eleanor had looked at her, her eyes full of a mother's fierce, undying love. "Promise me, baby." Eleanor had whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "Promise me you'll always take care of your father. He's a strong man, but he's going to be lost without me. Promise me." And I heard my daughter's reply, her voice choked with tears as she squeezed her mother's hand. "I promise Mama," she had vowed. "I'll always take care of Dad, I promise you." That sacred promise, that holy vow made to a dying woman, they were now planning to break it in the most brutal way imaginable. They were going to dispose of me like a piece of unwanted trash to fund a lavish lifestyle. The betrayal was not just against me, it was a desecration of Eleanor's final wish. It was a betrayal of her memory. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The heart-wrenching pain did not shatter me. It forged me. The fire of their betrayal burned away all the fear, all the confusion, all the manufactured incompetence. The fog that had clouded my mind for months vanished in an instant, leaving behind a cold, hard, and diamond-sharp clarity. I saw them. I saw their greed. I saw their plan. And I saw the path forward. The weak, forgetful old man they had so carefully created was dead. He died right there on that cold leather sofa. In his place, the man I had always been was resurrected. The builder, the planner, the protector, the husband who had made a promise to his wife to build them a sanctuary. They had started a war, and my resolve to finish it was now as solid and unyielding as the foundation of the very house they were trying to steal from under me. I was no longer an occupant. I was the architect of their downfall. In the immediate aftermath of that phone call, a strange and terrible calm settled over me. The rage was there, a white-hot furnace burning deep in my soul, but on the surface I was a placid lake. The shock had burned away my fear, and what remained was a clarity so pure and so cold, it felt like a weapon. I saw the chessboard with perfect vision. I saw their moves. I saw their strategy, and I saw the trap they had laid for me. My first instinct, the instinct of the man I used to be, was to confront them, to rise up in righteous anger, to throw their betrayal in their faces and order them out of my house. But I smothered that instinct before it could take a breath. What good would it do? They would deny everything. They would twist my anger into proof of my instability, my accusations into symptoms of my paranoia. A direct confrontation would only accelerate their plans. It would be the final piece of evidence they needed to have me declared incompetent and put away. No, I would not give them the satisfaction. A quiet voice in my mind, a voice that sounded a lot like my pragmatic Eleanor, whispered a better plan. They had spent months writing a script and casting me in the role of a helpless, senile old man. They had handed me my costume and taught me my lines through their relentless gaslighting, and now I would give them the performance of a lifetime. The character they had created to be my cage would now become my camouflage. I would not just play the part, I would inhabit it. I would become the most convincing, most pitiful, most forgetful old man they had ever seen. I would lean into their narrative so completely that their arrogance would blind them, and in their blindness, I would prepare my counterattack. They thought they were the directors of this tragedy, but I was about to become the author of a story of justice. The transformation began that very evening at the dinner table. Darnell was talking about some new tech gadget he wanted to buy, and I looked at him with a placid, vacant expression. "That's wonderful, David," I said, my voice soft and a little shaky. Darnell stopped mid-sentence. "It's Darnell Elijah." "My name is Darnell." I blinked, feigning confusion. I looked at Simone, my expression one of deep apology. "Oh my goodness. Of course it is. Forgive me, son. My mind is just not what it used to be these days. So many names, so many faces." I saw the look they exchanged over the top of my head. It was a look of smug confirmation, a silent communication that said, "See, he's completely gone." They thought they were winning. In reality, they had just lost everything. From that day on, I embraced my role with the dedication of a seasoned actor. I became more agreeable, more docile. A week later, Simone came to me with a stack of glossy brochures, her face a perfect picture of gentle concern. The brochures were for high-end assisted living facilities with names like Serenity Gardens and Golden Vista. "Dad," she said softly, we were thinking, "maybe it would be nice for you to have a little vacation. A place like this just for a short stay where you can have professional care and make some new friends." We could all use a little break, don't you think?" The old Elijah would have roared. He would have thrown those brochures in the fire. But the new Elijah, the actor, simply took them and looked at the pictures of smiling seniors playing bingo. I nodded meekly, a faint, foolish smile on my lips. "That looks very nice, dear," I whispered. "So many happy people. Whatever you and Darnell think is best for me, you know what's best." The relief that washed over her face was a tangible thing. She believed she had me. She had no idea that I was the one who had her. I perfected the art of appearing lost and disoriented. I would wander into the backyard and stand there looking at the oak tree as if I'd never seen it before. Darnell would have to come out and gently guide me back inside, his arm around my shoulder, his voice full of the condescending patience one uses with a toddler. "Come on back inside, Elijah. You don't want to get a chill," he'd say, and I would allow myself to be led, my steps shuffling, my eyes vacant. But inside my mind was a steel trap. I was cataloging every condescending word, every patronizing touch. I was building a case against them in the silent courtroom of my mind, and their every action was another piece of evidence for the prosecution. But a performance was not enough. I needed a tool. I needed a weapon. I needed a way to contact the outside world, a way to fight back without them knowing the fight had even begun. I needed a phone. My opportunity came on a Friday night about 2 weeks into my new role. They were going out a date night, they called it, to a fancy new restaurant downtown. It was their celebration, a toast to their impending victory. It would also be their fatal mistake. "Now, Dad, we'll be back late," Simone said, fixing her earrings in the hallway mirror. "We've left a sandwich for you in the fridge and your pills are on the counter. Don't you forget to take them now." "I won't, dear," I said from the sofa. "You two have a wonderful time. You deserve it." The moment the door closed behind them, I moved. The sluggish, confused old man vanished. I went to the landline in the kitchen, my fingers dialing the number for a local taxi service from memory. I kept the conversation brief, requesting a pickup at the end of the street in 10 minutes. Then I carefully navigated the phone's menu and erased the call from the history. I put on my coat, took the emergency $200 I kept hidden inside an old copy of Moby Dick, and slipped out the back door. The night air was cold and sharp, and it felt like the most glorious thing I had ever breathed. It was the air of freedom. The taxi ride to a 24-hour convenience store 5 miles away was the most thrilling journey of my life. I paid the driver in cash, telling him to wait. Inside, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I bought the cheapest prepaid phone they had, a simple device with no bells and whistles. A burner phone. I paid for it and a $100 top-up card with cash. 10 minutes later, I was back in the taxi, the small rectangular box, a heavy, powerful weight in my coat pocket. I made it back to the house and slipped inside with nearly an hour to spare. I hid the phone and its charger in the deepest, darkest corner of my closet behind a stack of old shoeboxes. The first move on the chessboard was mine. The true test of my nerve came a few days later. The constant fear of discovery was a fire in my gut. I had been studying the phone's simple instruction manual in the privacy of my room, trying to master its functions. I was sitting on my bed, the small phone in my hand, when my bedroom door burst open without a knock. It was Darnell, a wide, false smile on his face. My heart leaped into my throat. In a single panicked motion, I shoved the phone under my pillow, my body reacting before my mind could even form a thought. "Just checking in on you, Elijah," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "Simone and I were thinking this room is getting a bit cluttered. Thought I could help you clear out some of this old junk, make some more space for you to move around." He wasn't asking, he was telling. I forced my racing heart to slow the mask of the feeble old man snapping back into place. "Oh," I said, my voice thin. "That's very thoughtful of you, Darnell." He started moving around the room, picking things up, his presence an absolute violation of my space. He was not cleaning, he was asserting his dominance. He moved towards my nightstand. The phone's instruction manual was lying right there next to my lamp. Before I could say a word, he picked it up. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through the small booklet. I had to think fast. "Oh, that's for the new clock radio Simone bought me. So many buttons. An old man like me gets confused." He grunted, seemingly accepting the answer, and tossed the manual back on the nightstand. Then he turned his attention to the small stack of books there. My heart pounded. The phone was under the pillow, but my gut screamed with a primal fear. He was too close. He was looking for something. He was a predator sniffing the air for weakness. And then he did something that almost stopped my heart completely. He reached over and picked up the thickest book from the stack, an old, heavy volume of Walt Whitman's poetry that had been Eleanor's absolute favorite. "Wow, this one is heavy," he said, weighing it in his hand. "Probably haven't opened this in 50 years, just collecting dust. We should probably get rid of these." I felt the blood drain from my face. As he had approached the bed, I had, in a moment of pure unthinking terror, slipped the phone from under the pillow and slid it between the pages of that very book. It was an instinctive act of concealment, and now he was holding the evidence in his hand. If he opened it, if he even riffled through the pages, it was all over. I could see it all flashing before my eyes, his discovery, his triumphant rage, the final accelerated push to put me away. I had to hold the line. I could not show a flicker of fear. I looked at him, my expression one of gentle, nostalgic sadness. "Oh, that one," I said, my voice a soft whisper. "That was Eleanor's favorite. She used to read it to me. She loved her poetry." I let my voice crack just a little at the end. It worked. He looked from the book to my face, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't pity, it was satisfaction. The satisfaction of seeing a man so thoroughly broken, so lost in the sentimental past that he posed no threat at all. He saw a harmless relic, not an adversary. With a dismissive grunt, he placed the book back down on the nightstand, a little too hard, the sound making me jump. He never opened it. He moved on, poking at a few other things before declaring the room a lost cause for the day and leaving. The moment the door closed, I collapsed back onto the bed, my body shaking with a violent, uncontrollable tremor. I was drenched in a cold sweat. It was the closest I had ever come to complete and total disaster. I waited a full 5 minutes before my trembling hands could retrieve the phone from its hiding place inside Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. It was safe. But the close call had taught me a vital lesson. My enemies were arrogant, but I could not afford to underestimate them for a second. The risks were immense. But holding the small, cool plastic of the phone in my hand, the fear receded, replaced once again by that cold, hard resolve. This was my weapon. This was my lifeline. And I knew exactly who I needed to call first. The night after Darnell had nearly discovered the phone, I waited until the house was completely still. I waited until I heard the faint sound of the television in their bedroom click off, and then I waited another full hour listening to the old house settle and groan around me. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. Finally, when I was certain they were asleep, I slipped out of bed. I didn't turn on a light. I moved through the familiar darkness of my own home like a ghost making my way to the walk-in closet. I closed the door behind me, plunging myself into a pitch-black, suffocating space that smelled of old wool and cedar. It was here, huddled on the floor amongst my own shoes, that I finally took out the phone, my lifeline. My fingers clumsy with a mixture of age and adrenaline fumbled with the small buttons. I turned the device on the sudden bright glare of the screen, making me flinch. I had only one person in mind, one name that represented trust and integrity in a world where those things seemed to have vanished. Charles Jones. He had been more than just my lawyer for over 40 years. He had been my friend. He and his wife used to play cards with Eleanor and me. He had been a pallbearer at her funeral. If there was one man on this earth I could trust with my life, it was Charles. I scrolled through the phone's contacts, a list that contained only his single precious number, and I pressed the call button. It rang 3 times, each ring echoing in my ear like a hammer blow. I almost hung up, terrified of the late hour. But then his voice came on the line, thick with sleep, but instantly recognizable. "Hello, this is Charles Jones." "Charles," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's Elijah. Elijah Vance. I am so sorry to call you this late." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear some shuffling as he likely sat up in bed. His voice, when it came back, was sharp with concern. "Elijah. My God, man, it's 2 a.m. Is everything all right? Are you hurt?" No, I'm not hurt," I whispered, leaning my head back against the closet wall. "Not physically, anyway." "Charles, I'm in a bit of a family situation here, a difficult one, and I need your advice. I need a lawyer." The way I said it, the raw desperation in my whisper must have conveyed the gravity of the situation. Charles's voice lost all trace of sleepiness. It became the calm, focused voice of the man who had seen me through every contract and legal battle of my professional life. "All right, Elijah, I'm listening. Tell me everything from the beginning, and don't leave a single detail out." And so I did. There, in the darkness of my own closet, I unburdened my soul for the first time. I told him everything. I told him about the loneliness after Eleanor died and how Simone and Darnell's offer to move in had felt like a prayer being answered. I told him about the subtle changes, the curtains, the library, the armchair that held so much of my heart. I told him about the gaslighting, the constant chipping erosion of my confidence and my memory. I told him about the devastating incident with the heart medication and how for the first time I truly believed I was losing my mind. And finally, my voice cracking with a pain that was still so fresh and raw, I told him about the phone call I had overheard. I recounted their entire plan, Darnell's cruel dismissive words, and the casual way they planned to dispose of me in a place called Golden Years. Throughout my entire story, Charles did not interrupt once. He just listened. I could feel his focused silence on the other end of the line, a silence that was not empty but filled with a gathering intensity. When I finally finished, the only sound was my own ragged breathing. I had said it all out loud, and the shame and the horror of it washed over me anew. After a long, heavy pause, Charles finally spoke. His voice had changed. The friendly concern was still there, but it was now underpinned by a cold, hard anger that sent a shiver down my spine. The absolute unmitigated gall of those two, he said, his voice a low growl. Elijah, I am so sorry, so deeply sorry you've had to endure this alone. He took a deep breath. Now, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not weak. You are not incompetent. And you are most certainly not defenseless. He paused again and then asked a question that seemed to change the very air I was breathing. Elijah, do you remember about 25 years ago? You and Eleanor came to my office. We were updating your estate plan and we spent a whole afternoon working on it. You signed a whole stack of documents. I searched my memory, the memory I had been taught to distrust. Vaguely, I admitted. I thought we were just updating our wills. I could almost hear Charles smile on the other end of the line. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just spotted its prey. Oh, we did much more than that, my friend. You and Eleanor were always smart planners. You didn't just write a will. You created a legal fortress. It's called the Vance Family Irrevocable Trust. The words hung in the air. I had a faint memory of the term, but I had never understood its true power. Charles began to explain, and with every word I felt the foundations of my prison starting to crumble. Here's what that means in plain English, Elijah, he said, his voice clear and sharp as a scalpel. 25 years ago, you and Eleanor legally transferred the ownership of your house to the trust. So you, Elijah Vance, are not the legal owner of that property on paper. The trust is. And the trust is a separate legal entity like a company. It owns the house. He let that sink in before continuing. And here is the most important part. When you created the trust, you and Eleanor appointed yourselves as the sole trustees. Now that dear Eleanor is gone, you are the one and only trustee. That means you have absolute 100% unquestionable legal authority over that house and every single thing in it. You are the king of that castle with the legal documents to prove it. My mind was reeling, trying to grasp the immense implications. But what about Simone, I asked. Her name is on it, isn't it? Yes, Charles confirmed. She is named as a beneficiary of the trust. That means she is entitled to inherit the assets of the trust, including the house upon your passing. But until that day, she has zero, and I mean zero, legal authority to sell it, lease it, or even change the drapes without your express permission as the trustee. She is a passenger, Elijah. You have always been the pilot of the plane. A wave of profound, bone-deep relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me weep. All this time I had thought I was a helpless old man at the mercy of his cruel children. But I wasn't. I was protected. Protected by my own foresight and by the enduring love of the wife who had always looked out for us. It felt like a gift from Eleanor reaching out across the years to save me one last time. My voice was stronger when I spoke again. Charles, they are already selling it. They have an offer. $3.2 million. They said they're closing at the end of the month. There was another silence, and then Charles let out a single harsh laugh. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. They are bigger fools than I could have possibly imagined. Elijah, listen to me. Their arrogance is their undoing. They are attempting to sell a multi-million-dollar asset that they do not legally own. That isn't just a mistake. That is a federal crime. It's called fraud. Depending on how they are doing it, it could be bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. They are building their own prison brick by brick, and they don't even see it. He explained, that they must have assumed I was too old and senile to have such a sophisticated legal structure in place. They likely never bothered to do a proper title search on the property because in their minds they already had control of the owner. They were building a house of cards on a foundation of lies and we were about to blow it all down. The conversation ended with Charles giving me my first set of orders. His voice was no longer that of a sympathetic friend. It was the voice of a general commanding his troops. "You will not say a single word, Elijah. You will continue to play your part. Let them walk deeper and deeper into this trap they've set for themselves. In the meantime, I want you to safely gather any documents you can find related to this sale. Any letters from realtors, any contracts, anything. But do not get caught. We will talk again tomorrow night, same time. The game has changed, my friend. And now we're going to win it." I hung up the phone. I sat there in the darkness of the closet for a long time, the small, cheap phone feeling like a scepter of immense power in my hand. The fear that had been my constant companion for months was gone. The confusion was gone. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my grief for incompetence. They had mistaken the lion for a lamb. And they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The day Simone and Darnell left for their celebratory trip to Dubai was a masterclass in deception. They were practically vibrating with excitement, their faces glowing with the thrill of their impending wealth. Their expensive new luggage stood by the door like a monument to their greed. They gave me their final condescending instructions as if I were a child being left with a babysitter. "Now, Dad, the caregiver, will be here every morning at 9 sharp to make your breakfast and check on you," Simone said, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "Her name is Maria. Please try to remember it this time." Darnell clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "And no wandering off, old man. Just stay put, watch your television shows, and be a good boy while we're gone. We'll bring you back a souvenir." The promise was an insult, and we all knew it. I played my part to perfection. I summoned a few tears, allowing them to well in my eyes as I looked at my daughter. I let my voice tremble as I wished them a safe flight. "I'll miss you so much," I whispered, looking frail and heartbroken. I gave them a feeble wave from the doorway as their taxi pulled away, holding the pose until the car was completely out of sight. The moment it turned the corner, the tears dried, my back straightened, and the feeble old man they had so carefully constructed vanished forever. I closed the door, and the cold, hard resolve returned. The stage was set. It was time for the final act. I walked calmly to the kitchen, retrieved the burner phone from its new hiding place, and dialed Charles's number. My voice was steady and clear. "They're gone, Charles. It's time." The next morning, a quiet professional meeting took place in Charles's downtown office. It was me, Charles, and 2 representatives from the Westside Community Historical Preservation Society. They were not the cold corporate types I had expected. They were a man and a woman in their 60s with kind eyes and a genuine passion for history and architecture. They had already reviewed the blueprints and the history of the house which Charles had provided. "Mr. Vance," the woman, Mrs. Gable, said, her voice filled with sincere respect. "What you and your wife built is more than just a house. It is a work of art, a perfect example of mid-century craftsmanship. It is a piece of this city's history, and we would be profoundly honored to preserve it for future generations." We spent an hour finalizing the details. The sale price was fair, but that was the least important part of the transaction for me. The most important part was the 2 clauses I had insisted on. The first was that the house would be granted landmark status and could never be torn down or significantly altered. The second, and the one that brought a lump to my throat, was the creation of the Eleanor Vance Scholarship. A significant portion of the sale's proceeds would be placed in a perpetual fund administered by the society to provide grants to promising young art students in the community. Eleanor, who had to give up her own dreams of being a painter to raise a family, would now be helping other young artists achieve theirs. Her legacy would not be a cold, dead asset in a bank account. It would be a living, breathing force for good in the world. When the time came to sign the papers, my hand did not tremble. With Charles by my side, I signed away the physical structure I had called home for 50 years. But I was not losing anything. I was transforming it. I was turning their greed into grace, their betrayal into a blessing for others. I was honoring my wife in a way they could never, ever comprehend. The day after the sale was legally finalized, the moving trucks arrived. It was not a single truck, but a fleet of them, a small army descending on the quiet street. I had hired the best, most efficient company in the city, and I was their commander for the day. I stood on the porch with a clipboard and a clear plan. The operation was executed with military precision. One team was assigned to carefully pack every personal item that belonged to me and Eleanor. The photo albums, her collection of poetry books, the old grandfather clock, the small precious trinkets we had collected over a lifetime. These were boxed, labeled, and loaded onto a specific truck destined for a new secure and completely secret apartment I had already leased across town. A second team was tasked with removing all the furniture and decor that Simone and Darnell had brought into the house. The cold leather sofa, the dark joyless curtains, the soulless art they had hung on the walls. I instructed the crew to deliver every last piece of it to a local charity donation center. Their attempts to erase my history were now being erased themselves, given away to strangers. The rest of the house's contents were professionally packed and sent to a long-term storage facility under my name. I walked through the rooms for the last time, watching as my life was systematically boxed up. It was a strange, hollow feeling, but it was not a sad one. I was not a man losing his home. I was a man reclaiming his soul. I said a quiet goodbye to each room, to the memories that lived in the walls, knowing that I was not abandoning them, but setting them free. By late afternoon, the house was completely empty. The moving trucks were gone. I stood alone in the grand foyer, the afternoon sun slanting through the now bare windows, illuminating a universe of dust. The echo of my own footsteps on the naked hardwood floors was the only sound. It was the sound of emptiness, but also the sound of a clean slate. My work was almost done. I walked to the fireplace, the one where they had planned to sit and celebrate their victory, and I placed a single sealed white envelope on the center of the mantelpiece. Then, without looking back, I walked out the front door and closed it gently behind me for the last time, the click of the lock sounding final and absolute. The trap was set. All that was left was for the targets to walk into it. And so we come full circle, back to the beginning. While my daughter and her husband were stepping into the shocking emptiness of their own greed, I was miles away, sitting in my new apartment. It was a smaller space, but it was clean and bright, and it was mine. I was by a large window looking out over a city park I had never seen before, a simple cup of coffee warming my hands. I was not anxious. I was not angry. I was profoundly, deeply at peace. The final move on the chessboard had been made, and now all that was left was for my opponents to realize that they had been checkmated from the very first move. I closed my eyes and I allowed myself to picture the scene. I saw them pull up in the taxi, their faces alight with triumph and jet lag. I saw them walk up the stone path, their steps so full of arrogance and entitlement. They were conquerors returning to claim their prize, completely unaware that the kingdom had already vanished. I pictured Darnell sliding the key into the lock, his confident smile as the tumblers turned. He was a thief with a key, believing it gave him the right of ownership. And then I pictured the moment the door swung open, the moment the sound of birds in the trees was swallowed by the cavernous tomb like silence of the empty house. I imagined their smiles freezing, cracking, and falling from their faces like shattered glass. I imagined their eyes wide with a disbelief so pure it bordered on madness. And then the scream I had heard in my mind 1,000 times. Simone's shriek of pure, unfiltered horror echoing off the bare walls, a sound of a spoiled child who has finally been told no. In my mind's eye, I watched them stumble inside. I saw them run from room to room, their frantic footsteps thundering on the naked floors. They would race through the empty dining room, the hollowed-out kitchen, up the stairs to the vacant bedrooms. Each doorway would frame another scene of absolute emptiness, another confirmation that their perfect plan had catastrophically, impossibly failed. Their denial would have been the first stage, a frantic search for some logical explanation, a mistake, a robbery. But a robbery so total, so absolute, one that takes the curtains and the carpets. No, the terrifying truth would begin to dawn on them, cold and sharp. And then I pictured them finally coming to a stop in the center of the vast empty living room, panting amidst the echoes of their own panic, defeated. And that is when they would see it. Their eyes would be drawn to the one single object in the entire house that had been left behind, the one thing that broke the perfect sweeping emptiness. There, standing stark and white against the dark wood of the fireplace mantel, was a single sealed envelope. It wasn't just a letter. It was a silent judgment, a final damning statement waiting to be read. I can picture Darnell snatching the envelope from the mantelpiece, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and confusion. He would have ripped it open impatiently, expecting a rambling, incoherent letter from a senile old man. Instead, he would find a few pages of calm, clear, and damning truth written in the steady hand of the man I had always been. The letter was not an attack. It was a simple statement of fact. It began, "My dearest Simone and Darnell, if you are reading this, your celebratory trip must be over, and you have discovered that things are not as you left them. I imagine you are quite confused, so allow me to offer an explanation. For many months you have operated under the assumption that I was a confused and incompetent old man, an occupant to be managed until he could be conveniently disposed of. I know about your plans for me at Golden Years Assisted Living. I know about your fraudulent sale of this house, a house you never had the legal right to sell. I know everything. This house was a promise I made to your mother Simone. It was our sanctuary built with our hands and filled with our love. I could not, and I would not allow that sacred promise to be broken. Therefore, acting in my legal capacity as the sole trustee of the Vance Family Irrevocable Trust, I have sold this property to the Westside Community Historical Preservation Society. It will be preserved forever, and a scholarship in your mother's name will help young artists for generations to come. Her legacy will be one of creativity and hope, not a funding source for your lavish lifestyle. You may remember a promise you made Simone. You stood by your mother's deathbed and you promised her you would always take care of me. As you read this, I hope you understand the profound and tragic way in which you have broken that vow. I am now taking care of myself, and in doing so, I am finally truly taking care of your mother's legacy. I wish you both the best in dealing with the consequences of your own actions. Sincerely, your father, Elijah Vance." As Charles later recounted to me, the scene that followed was one of pure, unadulterated panic. Darnell, in his blind arrogance, refused to believe it. He was a deal-maker, a shark. He was not going to be outsmarted by an old man. He immediately snatched his phone and dialed Charles, his voice a torrent of threats and bluster. "What is the meaning of this, Jones?" he roared into the phone. "Elijah is senile. He's not competent to make any decisions. We have a legally binding contract to sell that house. This is elder abuse, and I will sue you for everything you've got." Charles, on the other end of the line, remained perfectly calm. I can picture him leaning back in his leather office chair, the very picture of professional composure. "Mr. Darnell," he said, his voice cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, "the only legitimate sale was the one executed yesterday morning by the sole trustee of the property, Mr. Elijah Vance. The contract you are referring to is a fraudulent document for an asset your shell corporation never had the legal authority to represent. It is worthless." Charles let that sink in before delivering the final devastating blows. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing the loan documents you secured from the bank for your fraudulent purchase. $3.2 million, a very impressive sum. However, since you are now unable to deliver the property you used as collateral, that entire loan is due in full immediately. I imagine the bank will be in touch shortly." There was a stunned silence on Darnell's end. Charles continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Furthermore, I feel professionally obligated to inform you that knowingly securing a multi-million-dollar loan against an asset you do not own is a serious federal crime. It is called bank fraud. The penalties are substantial. I have already been in contact with the bank's fraud division as well as the appropriate federal authorities. They are all very, very interested in speaking with you and your wife. I would strongly advise you to find a good criminal defense attorney. Good day, Mr. Darnell." Charles hung up the phone, and in that moment their world, a world built on a foundation of lies and greed, collapsed into ruin. They had returned to this country as triumphant millionaires, and in the span of 10 short minutes, standing in the echoing emptiness of their own betrayal, they had become bankrupt, disgraced criminals. Their lives were over, and they had no one to blame but themselves. I sit now in the quiet of my new life. My apartment is not large, but it is filled with a warm afternoon light that my old house in its final sad months never had. My favorite armchair, the one I thought was gone forever, sits by the window. Eleanor's books line a small, tidy shelf, their familiar spines like old friends. The pictures of our life together hang on the walls, and their smiles are no longer ghosts in a house of sorrows. They are warm presences in a home filled with peace. There is no feeling of vengeful triumph in my heart, no satisfaction in the ruin my children brought upon themselves. There is only a profound sense of calm, a quiet relief. The storm has passed. I did not do any of this for revenge. I did it to honor a promise made to the woman I loved. By protecting the legacy of our home, I protected her memory from the tarnish of their greed, And in doing so, I reclaimed something I didn't even realize I had lost: my own dignity. At 78 years old, I feel as though I am building again. I spent my youth building a house of wood and stone for my family. Now in my final years, I am building a home for my spirit on a foundation of self-respect that no one can ever shake. Perhaps one day my daughter will find her way back to the person she was meant to be. The door to my heart is not locked forever, but it can only be opened with a key of genuine remorse and earned respect. That is a journey she must take on her own. For now, I have found my own peace. I sold a house, but I reclaimed my life. And for the first time in a long time, I am looking forward to tomorrow. True strength isn't about the battles you win, but the dignity you refuse to surrender. Legacy is not built on property, but on character. When trust is treated as a commodity, its bankruptcy is inevitable, leaving behind a debt that no amount of money can ever repay.